Paramis, as probably many of you don't know what that is. But it is a word from the Buddhist tradition, in the Buddhist world, which means, refers to the qualities of the heart. And so through the Paramis is kind of a reference to, instead of a literal interpretation of the virtues that, as we call them more commonly in the Christian realm, an exploration through visual and through experience as well, instead of a descriptive kind of thing. So I thought that for today I would give you a little bit of an idea of how this series came about and what inspired me and what I was thinking or not when I was creating them. And I realized that probably most of that, you will not see it in the paintings, but it's my process, and that just happens to be what came out. So this series, I also call it groundings, because they in a way reflect the ground where I come from in many different ways. And this grew out of 3 different roots that I was able to identify. Maybe there's more, but and there are significant forces that sort of came together. And I'll mention them briefly and then a little bit more. One of them is my upbringing in a home where the Bible and the church were everything, permeated our whole lives. Another is the resonance I have felt through early Renaissance paintings, particularly frescoes. And another is my encounter with Buddhist tradition and their interpretation of virtues and what they call the Paramis. So, louder? Okay. So my upbringing. My father was a preacher, an evangelist in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So praying, worship, being at church multiple times a week was just part of everything, and everything was colored by the church, by the teachings from the Bible. And so as a child, I took these quite to heart in my own little way. And as I grew, these obviously changed, developed, deepened. I always had a lot of questions and a lot of interest in the religious and spiritual aspects. So that by the time I got to college, I was having lots of questions and devoured lots of theology books and some philosophy as well. So that is one of the roots. The Renaissance paintings. When I was a child, my parents, or our whole family, spent 5 years in Switzerland. And so during vacations, we took advantage of being there and traveled to all these beautiful sites that you can find around there. And of course, some were museums, castles, and art museums, and churches. Lots of churches and chapels. And I was probably bored a lot of the time and excited, whatever. And I didn't, whatever experience it was. But later I realized that that really planted a seed in me, because I became aware of the power of art and architecture and how incredible that can be. Here in the U.S., sometimes we lack that experience. There you're just surrounded with it, and it creates a whole environment. And so as I, later as an adult, I realized, that this seed, and as I went back to visit, and I'm always amazed at the power that these paintings, especially early frescoes, for some reason, have on me, and the nurturance it gives me, and the inspiration, both as an artist and just as a human being. And these little chapels that are just both the architecture, and then you're surrounded by all these color and stuff. So even now, I'm bored, I pick up my books of stuff and try to capture a glimpse of that. And in stark contrast to that, as all good Protestants probably, the churches where I grew up in were pretty blank, not like many of the Catholic ones. So a lot of white walls. And once I became involved in the art, when I was boring sermon or whatever, I'd be looking at the walls, trying to imagine, it's like, wouldn't it be wonderful to have something to look at, or even if it wasn't boring, something to complement the service. And I would try to imagine what that would mean, now, 20th century, 21st century. Was it possible to have something as powerful as that was and still is, but in a contemporary way? And so that's sort of always been sort of in the back of my mind. That curiosity, was that possible? And the other root is the Buddhist tradition. I became acquainted or introduced to that some years ago, and through meditation and the talks and stuff, I've become a little bit more acquainted throughout it, and it gives for me a different angle to a lot of the same issues that I've been part of my life. So as I became acquainted with that, I became acquainted with the little group of virtues called the Paramis, and their significance, and the call to cultivate that we all have the ability to cultivate these generosity, truthfulness. And at some point, a couple of years ago, I realized that I could listen to these talks or teachings that you could get on the web, and I could stick them in my car and listen to them after I dropped off the kids or something. And for some reason, whatever the need I had, I started listening to a lot of them that were related to the Pyrenees. So I try to understand what it meant, not just as something to believe in, but something to cultivate, to practice. So these are the roots. And I had had a significant break in my studio practice, and I was trying to figure out, well, am I going to go in a new direction? What am I going to do? The usual struggle, but a little bit more heightened since I had a break. And as I was struggling with that question, as well as the painting, struggling with the painting that I was working on, which, just was going nowhere, and struggling with just, personal issues. And then I was listening to these talks, and it just all came together for me. Sort of the idea became obvious to me that I wanted to explore this series. So I took the inspiration of the Romanesque, Renaissance, and even Gothic chapels and cathedrals, and that incredible sacred space that they create, and that nurturance that they've given me personally, and I think a lot of other people. And take that curiosity that I've had, is it really possible to have something contemporary that would even come remotely close to that? We've had a lot of stories represented through history in the visual form, stories from the Bible, but also some virtues have been represented in Christian art. And so I thought, wow, I'm exploring these paramis, these virtues. Those are in every tradition. I looked up virtue, and it's like all the different traditions, they all have these lists of virtues, and a lot of them overlap. Some emphasize more courage or loving kindness or faith. The emphasis might be slightly different, but it's the same thing. So I thought, wow, this is a really beautiful and important thing for me personally to explore, and I think other people might relate to it. So I decided, okay, I'm going to give it a try. My ideal is really high, but just aiming that way would serve as an inspiration for me. So I decided to go ahead and try to make a set of 10, which is the traditional Paramis, or 10 pieces. And I haven't completed them all yet, so it's still a work in progress. I used, in a direct way, the inspiration from the cathedrals and churches. I took the floor plans of some churches. At first I thought, well, churches I visited too and it really resonated. But then it grew into, well, church plans that I like, just visually. If I've been to them and like them, that's even better. So I took floor plans. Usually you have the pillars and the walls, and use that in my painting when I started off. So I paint a particular church floor plan on the painting at the very beginning, and then through that I start weaving my very loose interpretation of one of these paramis for that painting, and how as we try to cultivate, say, integrity, how we fall flat on our faces so many times, and yet we get up and we continue that, and that struggle, that wanting and not wanting, and yet at a higher level, wanting to cultivate that tribute, that quality of the heart. So as I work through them, all these things sort of come into that